She was a young black woman with everything to give and nothing but her dignity to protect. He was a Korean mafia boss with a dragon tattooed up his neck and an empire built on silence and fear. And for a moment, just a moment, they had something real. Then someone whispered a lie into his ear, and he believed it. He stood in her doorframe that night, no raised voice, no hesitation, and looked directly at the woman carrying his child, and chose the lie over her. He took away her job. He took away her future. He took away everything except the one thing she refused to surrender: herself. She raised that little girl alone. No help, no apology, no explanation. Just a mother who worked double shifts, studied through the night, and smiled at her daughter every single morning like the world had not tried to break her in half. 9 years passed. 9 years of silence. And then one Saturday afternoon in a Brooklyn art gallery, a little girl reached out her hand. And a crescent-shaped birthmark on her tiny wrist stopped a powerful man completely cold. Because he had seen that mark before, every single day of his life, on his own wrist. He never imagined that the truth he buried would have his eyes, his bone structure, and a chess set waiting on a table for a father she had never been told to expect. And she never imagined that the little girl she had fought so hard to protect would be the one to make the most powerful man she had ever known fall completely, irreversibly silent. What happened next changed everything. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. There are moments in a person's life that do not announce themselves as turning points. They arrive dressed as ordinary Tuesday mornings, as unremarkable phone calls, as a strip of plastic sitting on the edge of a sink in a clinic bathroom on a street nobody remembers the name of. They arrive quiet, and then they split everything into before and after, and the before disappears so completely that sometimes the person standing in the after can barely remember what it felt like to breathe without weight. This is the story of one of those moments, except that it did not belong to only one person. It belonged to 3, and only one of them knew it yet. The 42nd floor of the Jang Global Trade Building did not look like the kind of place where lives were made and unmade. It looked like money made architectural. Black marble floors that reflected the ceiling lights like a still lake. Floor-to-ceiling windows that turned Manhattan into something that belonged to whoever was standing at them. Furniture so precisely chosen that it communicated a single message to every person who walked through the elevator doors. Power lives here, and it does not apologize for existing. Jang Min-jun had built all of it. Not inherited, not borrowed. Built, with decisions that did not appear in any publicly accessible record, with alliances that were never photographed, with a discipline so complete that even the people closest to him sometimes forgot that underneath the tailored black suit and the dragon tattoo that climbed from his collarbone to the edge of his jaw, there was a man. Just a man. One who had learned very early that the world rewarded those who never let anyone see them flinch. He was 34 when Riley James walked off the elevator with a resume in her hand and a steadiness in her eyes that he did not expect. He had interviewed 11 people that morning. He remembered none of them with any clarity. They had all done the same thing. They had seen the tattoo, felt the temperature of the room, and immediately begun performing a version of themselves they believed he wanted. Riley did not perform. She sat down across from him, looked at the resume in her own hand as though confirming something, set it on the desk between them without being asked, and said, before he could open his mouth, that she typed 94 words per minute, spoke functional Mandarin from 2 semesters she had not wasted, and that she did not need the job explained to her if he needed it done. Only if he needed it done right. He hired her in 11 minutes. The interview was supposed to last 45. What grew between them in the months that followed did not have a clean beginning. That was perhaps the most honest thing about it. It was not a single moment. It was an accumulation, coffee left on his desk before he arrived, because she had memorized his schedule better than his own memory had. It was her pushing a tablet across the desk toward him at 10:47 on a Thursday night, when only the 2 of them remained in the building, pointing at a column of numbers that did not match, and him realizing that she had caught something 3 of his senior analysts had missed. It was the particular quality of the silence they could exist inside without either of them needing to fill it. It was also arguments, real ones. The kind that required two people to actually care enough about the outcome to raise their voices. She told him once, directly and without cushioning, that a decision he had made regarding a shipment routing would create a paper trail that a moderately competent investigator could follow. He told her that was not her concern. She told him with equal calm that she was making it her concern because her name was on the correspondence and she had not agreed to be someone's paper trail. He had looked at her for a long moment after that, and then, without comment, he had changed the routing. He did not tell her that was the first time in 4 years that anyone in that building had pushed back on him and been right. The first time he touched her was in October. They had been arguing again, this time over a report she had flagged with red annotations so thorough that it looked more like a critique than a document. He said she was wrong. She said the numbers said otherwise and pushed the tablet toward him across the desk. He looked at the screen. He looked at her. And something that he had been holding at a careful distance for months collapsed the space between them without permission from either of them. The kiss lasted 3 seconds. Everything after that lasted much longer. They did not name what they were. Naming it would have required acknowledging it to a world that was not safe for that acknowledgement, and both of them understood this without discussing it. His world was not a world where the man at the top was seen as soft, as distracted, as human. Her world was not a world where a young black woman in a building full of men who already questioned her presence could afford to be seen as anything other than exactly what she had been hired to be. So they existed in the space between what was real and what was visible. Late nights in an office that the rest of the world believed was empty. A restaurant on Thursdays that had no record of the reservation because the owner owed a debt that had nothing to do with food. His jacket over her shoulders in a park at 2 a.m, because she had refused to bring her own coat and he had not argued the point. He had simply taken his off. They fought the way people fight when the stakes are real. She disappeared into cold silences that lasted hours when he vanished for days without explanation. He became a wall of absolute stillness when she pressed into territory he had sealed off before she ever knew him. She cried sometimes, privately, in bathrooms, where the water covered the sound. He stood outside closed doors sometimes, hand raised to knock, and then lowered it and walked away instead. But they always came back, because, whatever this was, it was the only thing in either of their lives that did not require a performance. She did not feel different at first. The tiredness she attributed to hours, the nausea she attributed to the coffee she had been drinking too much of since a deadline pushed her schedule into the early mornings. She ignored Tuesday. She ignored Wednesday. On Thursday, she was sick in the bathroom on the 38th floor and stayed on the cold tile floor for 4 minutes before standing up, straightening her blouse and walking back to her desk. On Friday, she made an appointment. The clinic was on a side street in Midtown that she had passed 100 times without looking at. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and the particular anxiety of people who did not yet know their news. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the floor and told herself she was probably wrong about what she was thinking. The doctor was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain around her neck who spoke with the precise economy of someone who had delivered many different kinds of news in that same chair. She said, "Before anything else, let's rule out the obvious." The test took 2 minutes. Riley sat in a small room with a paper sheet on the examination table and a poster on the wall about vitamin D, and waited while 2 minutes became the longest unit of time she had ever experienced. The doctor came back. She sat down. She did not soften what she was about to say with excessive preamble, which Riley later realized she was grateful for. Positive. She sat in her car in the clinic parking garage for a long time. The concrete around her was gray and dim, and the fluorescent light above the hood of her car flickered every few seconds with the mild desperation of something that was not quite broken, but was no longer reliable. She held the phone in both hands. His name was already on the screen. She had not dialed it consciously. Her fingers had simply gone there, the way hands go to the familiar when the unfamiliar becomes too large. She pressed call. He answered on the second ring, and she could hear the low background texture of the conference room behind his voice, the faint presence of other people, the ambient formality of the world he operated in when he was not with her. "Jun," she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. I need to tell you something. Make it fast. I'm in the middle of something. She took one breath. Just one. I'm pregnant. The silence that followed was not the silence of someone processing unexpected joy. It was not the silence of shock that quickly reorganizes itself into relief. It was a different kind of silence entirely, the kind that has weight, the kind that presses. She counted the seconds the way a person counts when they are trying not to spiral. She got to 7 before he spoke. I heard you, he said. And? Another pause, much shorter this time. I need to think. The call did not end dramatically. There was no raised voice. There was simply the quiet termination of a connection, and then Riley was alone in the parking garage with the flickering light and the phone face down on the passenger seat and a truth inside her body that was already 10 weeks old and already, somehow, entirely hers. Little did she know that in that same moment, on the 42nd floor of the building she had dedicated 2 years of her life to, someone else had been listening. Someone who had been waiting, with extraordinary patience, for exactly this opportunity. And that someone was already smiling. Song Yi-ra had been many things in her life, but she had never been careless. Carelessness was a luxury that belonged to people who had something to fall back on. Family money, inherited position, the soft cushion of being chosen by circumstance rather than calculation. Yi-ra had none of those things. What she had was precision. What she had was patience. What she had was the particular intelligence of a woman who understood that the most dangerous move is never the one that looks dangerous. She had been watching Riley James for 14 months. Not obviously, not in any way that could be named or reported or pointed to in a room full of witnesses. She watched the way a person watches weather, constantly, peripherally, with the long-term attention of someone who understands that conditions change and that the person who has already read the sky will always have more time to act than the person who only looks up when the rain starts. She had seen what was growing between Riley and Min-jun before either of them had fully named it to themselves. She had seen it in the particular way his attention organized itself differently when Riley entered a room, not dramatically, not obviously, but differently, in the way that only someone already paying close attention would detect. She had seen it in the 11-minute interview, in the Thursday evenings when the building emptied, and the 42nd floor light stayed on longer than any deadline required. She had seen it, and she had cataloged it, and she had said nothing, because the moment to speak had not yet arrived. Yi-ra had loved Jung Min-jun for 3 years before Riley James ever stepped off that elevator. She had loved him in the way that certain people love, not warmly, not openly, but with a ferocious and possessive certainty that what she wanted was what she was owed. She had been his assistant before Riley. She had organized his world before Riley. She had been the one sitting across from him in rooms that no one else was permitted to enter, the one who understood the architecture of his life in all its legal and illegal complexity. She had been, in every meaningful way except the one that mattered to her, indispensable. And then Riley had walked in with her 94 words per minute, and her functional Mandarin and her tablet pushed across a desk, and Yi-ra had watched the one thing she had been waiting for, his attention, his real attention, the unguarded kind, go somewhere else entirely. She had waited, because she was never careless. And now, standing just outside the partially open door of the conference room, having heard every word of the phone call Min-jun had just received, she understood that the moment had finally arrived. She did not rush. That was the first thing. Rushing belonged to amateurs. She poured herself a glass of water from the credenza at the side of the room, walked back to her seat at the long table, and set it down without a sound. Min-jun was still holding his phone. The conference room had the particular frozen quality of a space where something unspoken had just entered and was waiting to be addressed. The other men at the table, 3 of them, all senior, all aware that the meeting had paused for a reason they were not going to ask about, found reasons to look at their own phones, or at the window, or at the grain of the wood in the table in front of them. Yi-ra looked at Min-jun. She let the silence sit for exactly the right amount of time. Not so short that it seemed prepared. Not so long that it seemed indifferent. Then with the voice she reserved for moments that required the appearance of reluctance. Problem? He did not answer immediately. His jaw was set. His thumb moved once across the face of his phone, and then he set it face down on the table. Riley says she's pregnant. Yira did not allow a single muscle in her face to move in any direction that was not carefully chosen. She lowered her eyes to the table. She brought her hands together in her lap. She let a breath move through her slowly, the kind of breath that signals internal struggle to anyone watching. And she knew he was watching, because he always watched everything. Then she said softly, with the precise weight of someone delivering something that costs them, "Minjun, you know that isn't possible." He looked at her directly then. The full weight of those dark eyes. The eyes that most people in that building could not sustain for more than a few seconds. Yira sustained them. She had practiced. "What are you saying?" he said. It was not a question. It was an instruction to continue. "I didn't want to tell you this." She paused. The pause was 3 seconds long, and she had rehearsed it without knowing she was rehearsing it, in the way that certain people rehearse things they tell themselves they would never need. "I saw her last month, leaving the Lexington with Choi Da-eun." The temperature in the room did not change. The temperature in Minjun's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted, and Yira felt it the way a surgeon feels the moment the instrument finds the right layer. "Twice," she added. "I saw them twice. That doesn't mean... I have photographs." She placed her phone on the table, already unlocked. Already open to the images she had spent 3 careful evenings constructing from legitimate photographs taken at a company dinner that Minjun himself had organized and then vacated due to an emergency that she had, with very little effort, helped manufacture. The images showed Riley laughing, Da-eun's hand at the small of her back. A hotel entrance behind them, caught in the background by what appeared to be chance. It was not chance. "I didn't know what to do with them," Yira continued, her voice dropping lower, her eyes returning to the table as though the photographs pained her to look at. "I didn't want to be the one to... I kept telling myself it wasn't my place. But now, with what she's telling you..." She let the sentence end without ending it. Because the most effective lies are the ones that make the listener complete the thought themselves. The conclusion Minjun would reach on his own would be more convincing to him than anything she could say aloud. She understood this. She had always understood this. She watched him look at the photographs for a long time. She watched the thing that happened to his face. Not collapse, because Minjun did not collapse, but a kind of interior closing, a drawing of every blind in a house until the rooms inside go completely dark. She had seen him shut down before in the face of threats, in the face of betrayal by men he had trusted with significant things. She had never seen him shut down like this. This was different. This was the shutting down of someone closing a room they had not realized they had left open. She almost felt something then. Almost. But Yira had spent 3 years making herself into something that did not leave openings, and she was not about to create one now. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I know this isn't..." "Leave it," he said. She left it. He arrived at Riley's apartment that same evening. What happened there? The words he said, the door he closed, the look on Riley's face as he stood in that doorframe and dismantled the only life she had allowed herself to want. None of that was visible to Yira. She was not there. She did not need to be. She had already done what needed doing. The rest was physics. The rest was simply consequence moving through its natural sequence. The way water moves after the dam breaks, indifferent to what it covers. What Yira did not account for, what the precision of her planning could not have included, because it was not a variable that operated on human logic, was the birthmark. She did not know about the birthmark. Nobody told her about the birthmark because it was not the kind of thing that appeared in a company file or a personnel record or a photograph taken outside a hotel. It was the kind of thing that existed quietly on a body, a small crescent of slightly darker pigment on the inner left wrist, the kind of mark that a person spends most of their life barely noticing on themselves and never imagining could matter. Minjun had had his since birth. His mother had called it his signature. His grandmother had called it the dragon's kiss and told him it meant he was marked for something. He had grown up dismissing this as the mythology that families build around ordinary things, and by the time he was old enough to know better, he had stopped thinking about it at all. It was simply there, on the inner left wrist, a small crescent, unremarkable. Yira had never seen it because Minjun did not expose that part of his wrist when Yira was present. The watch covered it. The cufflink covered it. It was not a secret. It simply was not visible. And 9 years later, on the sleeve of a 9-year-old girl in a Brooklyn art gallery, it would be more visible than anything Yira had ever tried to hide. But that night, none of that existed yet. That night, Riley James sat alone in her apartment after the door closed, in a silence so complete it had texture, with a positive pregnancy test on her kitchen table, and the particular devastation of someone who has just discovered that the person they trusted most was capable of looking directly at them and choosing not to believe what they saw. She did not call anyone. She did not scream. She sat in the chair by the window and looked at the street below, at the ordinary movement of people who did not know that 4 floors above them, a woman was making the quietest and most consequential decision of her life. She was going to keep the baby. She was going to do it without him. She was going to be so completely, so thoroughly all right, that the word all right would eventually feel too small for what she became. She did not know yet how long that would take. She did not know yet what it would cost. She only knew that the alternative, bending, appealing, lowering herself to prove something to a man who had already decided, was not something her body would allow. She stood up. She washed her face. She made a list. And somewhere on the 42nd floor of a building that bore his name, Jang Min-jun sat in an empty conference room long after everyone else had gone, staring at photographs that told a story that was not true, and choosing, because some part of him found it easier than the alternative, to believe them. Little did he know that the decision he made in that silent room would not stay silent. That truth, unlike lies, does not require maintenance. It simply waits, with extraordinary patience. With, as it turned out, exactly the patience of a 9-year-old girl who had never been told to be anything other than exactly what she was. 9 years is long enough to build a life. It is also long enough to forget, not the facts of what happened, but the precise physical sensation of them, the exact weight of a silence on a phone call, the exact temperature of a door closing, the exact quality of light in a parking garage when the world splits in two. The facts remain. The body, mercifully, lets the sharpest edges dull. Not disappear. Dull. Enough to function. Enough to make a grocery list and attend a parent-teacher conference and laugh genuinely at something a 9-year-old says at breakfast without the laugh catching on anything. Riley James had become very good at functioning. She had returned to the Bronx with 1 bag and the particular dignity of a woman who refuses to let her posture reflect her circumstances. Her mother, Dorothy James, had opened the door, looked at her daughter for exactly 1 second and said nothing beyond, "Come inside, baby," because Dorothy had raised Riley to understand that love does not always have the luxury of waiting for the right words, and that sometimes the most eloquent thing a person can offer is an open door and a warm stove. The pregnancy was not easy. High blood pressure at week 22 sent her to the hospital for 3 days, where she lay in a bed with monitors attached to her and stared at the ceiling tiles and refused to allow herself to feel sorry about anything except the inconvenience of missing work. She had taken a position at a call center in Harlem, $12 an hour, headset, fluorescent lights, the repetitive liturgy of customer complaints about billing errors. And she had been there 4 months already, and could not afford 3 days of absence without a conversation she did not want to have with her supervisor. Dorothy came every day, sat in the chair beside the bed, brought food in containers that the nurses technically were not supposed to allow and allowed anyway, because Dorothy James had a manner about her that made people want to accommodate her. She did not ask Riley about the father. She did not ask about the building on the 42nd floor, or the man with the tattoo on his neck, or any of the details that Riley had shared in fragments over the previous 1.5 years. Always carefully, always with the edited quality of someone who knew that what she was involved in was not fully explainable. Dorothy simply sat there, and that was enough. That was, in fact, everything. Hannah arrived in May, at 6:17 in the morning, during a rainstorm that beat against the hospital windows with a persistence that seemed almost personal. She was 6 pounds and 11 ounces, and she had from the very first moment a quality of alertness that the nurses commented on. The way her eyes, when they opened, seemed to be looking for something specific rather than simply adjusting to the fact of existing outside. Riley held her and understood immediately that whatever calculations she had been making about survival and logistics, and the sequence of steps required to rebuild a functional life from the materials available to her, all of it would be recalibrated now around this. Around this specific weight in her arms and this specific face, which was already, unmistakably, a combination of two people in a way that Riley looked at once and then deliberately looked away from. She named her Hannah because the name arrived in her mind with the quiet certainty of something that had always been true and was only now being confirmed. She did not know what it meant. She did not look it up for 3 weeks. When she finally did, sitting at the kitchen table at midnight while the baby slept and Dorothy slept, and the apartment was as quiet as it ever got, she read the translation, one, the first, the beginning, and sat with that for a long time without moving. Then she closed the browser and went to check that Hannah was still breathing, which she did every 40 minutes for the first 4 months, regardless of what the pediatrician said about healthy sleep cycles. The years did not pass gently. They passed the way years pass for a woman doing it alone, in increments of exhaustion and small victory, in the particular mathematics of a budget that requires more creativity than money, in the specific pride of watching a child become something astonishing, without the resources that astonishing children are supposed to require. Riley moved from the call center to a supervisory role after 18 months. She enrolled in night classes when Hannah was 2, sitting in the back row of a classroom in a community college in the Bronx, with a textbook on her lap and a phone in her pocket set to vibrate in case her mother called from the apartment where Hannah was sleeping. She graduated when Hannah was 5, in a ceremony that Hannah attended in a white dress with a purple sash that Dorothy had sewn by hand, and where Hannah sat in the front row and clapped with a focused enthusiasm that suggested she understood completely what was being celebrated, even if she could not have articulated why. From graduation, she moved to a coordinator position at a mid-sized logistics company in Queens. Not glamorous, not the 42nd floor. But stable, respectable, and hers, earned with no assistance from anyone who had once stood in a doorframe and chosen a lie over her. She moved into the apartment in Queens when Hannah was 6. 2 bedrooms, small kitchen, a window in the living room that caught the afternoon light in a way that made the whole room feel more generous than its square footage deserved. Riley stood in the empty living room on the first day with a box in her arms and looked at the light on the floor and allowed herself, for exactly 30 seconds, to feel something that was not quite happiness, but was adjacent to it. Something quieter, something more durable. Then she put the box down and started unpacking. She did not think about Minjun every day. That was the truth, and it was a truth she had earned. In the early months, she had thought about him with the grinding frequency of someone processing a wound that keeps reopening before it has time to close. By the first year, she thought about him in the specific context of Hannah, when Hannah did something with her hands, when Hannah tilted her head in a particular way while concentrating, when Hannah looked at someone across a room with those eyes, those precise and penetrating eyes that belonged to a man who had never been told they existed in a small girl's face. By the 3rd year, she thought about him the way a person thinks about weather that caused damage, with a kind of flat acknowledgement that it had happened and had been consequential, without the need to relive the specific sensation of standing in the middle of it. By the 9th year, she thought about him rarely, and when she did, it was not with longing. It was with the particular emotion that has no clean name, the one that lives between anger and exhaustion, and something that might, if pressed, be called grief. Not for him, but for the version of herself that had believed, with her whole chest, that what they had was real enough to survive contact with the world. The art gallery in Brooklyn was not her idea of a Saturday. It was Hannah's. Hannah had been given a pamphlet at school about a student art initiative that had partnered with a gallery in Brooklyn for an exhibition that included work by children across the city. 2 pieces from Hannah's class had been selected. Hannah herself had not submitted anything. She was, at 9, more interested in chess and arguments about whether dinosaurs would have developed language if they had not gone extinct than in visual art. But she had appointed herself the class representative for attendance, which meant that Riley's Saturday had been reorganized without her input. She dressed without thinking too much about it. Jeans, blouse, the white sneakers, the caramel bag, the gold chain with the star, because Hannah had given it to her for her last birthday, with the solemn gravity of a child presenting a significant diplomatic gift, and Riley wore it every day without exception. She put Hannah's hair in 2 puffs with white ribbons, and they took the subway, which Hannah treated as an adventure regardless of how many times they had taken it, narrating observations about the other passengers in a whisper that was not quite as quiet as she believed it to be. The gallery was warm and crowded in the pleasant way of Saturday afternoon cultural events. Families, students, a scattering of people who had come alone and stood in front of things for long periods with expressions of careful consideration. Hannah moved through the space with the confidence of someone who owned it, stopping in front of pieces and delivering verdicts with the authority of a 9-year-old who has decided that opinions are her natural medium. Riley followed her, half present, her eyes moving from the art on the walls to her daughter and back, in the easy surveillance of a mother who has learned to divide her attention without losing either thread. She was watching Hannah reach toward a glass sculpture, the 3rd time she had reached toward something she had been told not to touch, when she said her name sharply, twice, and then caught her daughter's wrist and redirected her. Hannah pivoted with the theatrical fluidity of a child executing an escape maneuver, and in pivoting, knocked her small purple backpack against a passing figure, and looked up. And Riley, following her daughter's gaze upward, went completely still. The man standing 3 feet away from her was taller than she remembered. Or perhaps she had simply spent 9 years reducing him in her memory to something more manageable than what he actually was. He was wearing black. He was always wearing black. The tattoo on his neck was exactly as she remembered it, the dragon climbing toward his jaw, the ink still dark and precise against his pale skin. His eyes were on Hannah, not on Riley. On Hannah. And on his face was an expression that Riley had never seen there before. Not in 2 years of working beside him, not in every argument and every quiet evening, and every moment she had believed she knew the full range of what his face was capable of producing. He looked like a man watching the floor open beneath him. He looked like a man who had just understood something enormous and irreversible, and who had no idea yet what to do with the understanding. His eyes moved from Hannah's face to Hannah's wrist, where the sleeve of the plaid dress had ridden up, and where the crescent mark sat on the inner left wrist, small and dark and patient, exactly where it had always been. Then his eyes moved to his own wrist, then back. The glass in his hand tilted. He caught it. The wine nearly went. He steadied himself with the physical discipline of a man who has spent decades refusing to let his body betray him. But his face had already said everything. There is a particular kind of reckoning that does not arrive with noise. It does not come with the dramatic architecture of a confrontation. Raised voices, pointed fingers, the satisfying theatrical clarity of someone finally being told, in front of witnesses, exactly what they did and exactly what it cost. That kind of reckoning exists, but it belongs to stories that are tidier than real life. The reckoning that actually changes people, that reaches into the interior of a person and rearranges something structural, arrives quietly. It arrives in a gallery on a Saturday afternoon. It arrives in the form of a child's wrist and a crescent mark that no human hand placed there and no human decision could have prevented. It arrives, and then it simply stands there, waiting to be absorbed. Jang Min-jun absorbed it slowly. He stood in the gallery with the tilted glass he had caught by reflex, and looked at the girl in front of him. This girl with his eyes and his bone structure and the mark on her wrist that his grandmother had called the dragon's kiss, and something inside him that had been held at a controlled and careful distance for 9 years simply gave way. Not loudly. Not with any external evidence that anyone else in the gallery would have noticed. Just a quiet internal collapse, the kind that happens when a structure has been bearing weight it was never designed to carry, for longer than any structure reasonably can. Riley had already turned, already said her daughter's name, already begun moving toward the exit with the focused efficiency of a woman who has survived worse than this, and knows that distance is the first tool of survival. His feet moved before the decision was fully formed. Riley. She stopped. Her back was to him. Her shoulders did not change position. They stayed exactly as they were, level and controlled, because Riley James had spent 9 years making sure that her body did not give away what her interior was doing. But she stopped, and the stopping was its own answer. Riley, I need... You don't need anything from me. The voice was low, precise. The voice of someone who has rehearsed this moment without knowing they were rehearsing it, in the same way that the body rehearses survival responses without conscious instruction. Please don't do this here. Hana was looking at him with the unfiltered directness of a child who has not yet learned that staring is considered impolite in most circumstances, and has decided anyway that the information gathered by staring is worth whatever social cost it carries. You know my mom? She asked. He looked at her. At this person who was 9 years old and already unmistakably a force of nature. At the eyes that were his own eyes in a face that was also Riley's face, and the combination of those two things was so unexpected and so complete that for a moment he was not certain he was still standing. Yes, he said, and his voice came out quieter than he intended. A long time ago. How long? Hana. Riley's voice carried a warning note that was gentle but absolute. I'm just asking. A long time, Minjun said again, because it was the truest thing he could offer in that moment, without opening something that could not be managed in the middle of a public gallery on a Saturday afternoon. Hana considered this with the judicial seriousness she applied to most things. Then, why is she making that face then? Riley closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. When she opened them, she was already reaching for Hana's hand with the practiced smoothness of a woman who has navigated 1,000 small crises without breaking stride. Minjun stepped forward, not blocking, not aggressive, simply present in a way that made leaving require a deliberate choice rather than a default motion. 5 minutes, he said. Please. They went to the cafe next door because Hana wanted hot chocolate and because, as she explained to both adults with complete seriousness, important conversations should happen somewhere comfortable, which she had learned from a book about negotiation that she had found on Riley's shelf and read without asking permission. Riley sat across from him with her hands around a cup of tea she had no intention of drinking, her back straight, her eyes on the table, her jaw set with the particular tension of someone maintaining composure through an act of will that costs more than it appears to. Minjun sat across from her for the first time in 9 years and looked at what 9 years looked like on the face of a woman he had discarded, and found that it looked like nothing he had imagined. He had imagined, in the moments when he allowed himself to imagine it, that she would look diminished, that the years without the salary and the protection and the proximity to his world would have worn something away. He had imagined this because it was easier than the alternative. She did not look diminished. She looked like someone who had been tested by significant heat and had come out of it with a density that had not existed before. There was something in the quality of how she occupied her chair, not with the practiced elegance of someone performing composure, but with the genuine settledness of someone who has nothing to prove and has known this long enough that it is no longer a thought but simply a condition. She was more herself than he had ever seen her, and it cost him something to observe this that he had not anticipated. Yira lied, he said, because there was no version of this conversation that did not begin there. I know, Riley said. He looked up. You know? I figured it out about a year after. Her voice was even, uninflected. The dinner Daun and I attended was on your calendar. I scheduled it. Whatever she showed you, I know what it was, and I know what it wasn't. She lifted her eyes to his then, and the directness of that look was something he felt in his sternum. I just didn't have anyone to tell. Riley, I'm not finished. She set her cup down. You could have called. You had every resource available to you. You could have found me in 24 hours if you had chosen to. You didn't choose to. She paused. So let's not make this about Yira. Yira handed you a reason to do something you chose to do. Those are two different things. The silence that followed had weight. Hana, who had been applying herself to her hot chocolate with focused dedication, looked up. Are you my father? She asked. The question landed in the middle of the table like something solid. Minjun looked at Riley. Riley did not look at him. She looked at her daughter with an expression that was not warning and was not permission. It was simply the face of a woman who has decided that she will not be the one to manage this particular moment for anyone else. Minjun looked at Hana. At those eyes. At the wrist resting on the table between them, the mark visible at the edge of her sleeve like a quiet declaration. Yes, he said. Hannah did not react with shock. She absorbed it with the same judicial seriousness she had brought to the question. Then she looked at her own wrist. Then at his. She has one too, she told him, nodding toward Riley without looking away from the birthmarks. On her shoulder, a different one. Hers is a star. She looked up. Did you know that? He did not know that. He looked at Riley. Riley was looking at Hannah with an expression that contained multitudes, exasperation and love, and the particular helplessness of a parent faced with a child who is simultaneously too perceptive and too young for what they are perceiving. Your teacher is right, Minjun said quietly, remembering what Riley had told him Hannah had said about apologizing and fixing. When you make a mistake, you apologize, and you fix it. He looked at Riley then, directly. I was wrong. I destroyed something real because I was too proud to protect it. You deserved better. You deserved everything better. And I am sorry. I am so deeply, irreversibly sorry for what I took from you. Not from me, not from us. From you. Riley looked at him for a long moment. Sorry is the beginning of a very long sentence, she said finally. Not the whole sentence. I know. She is not a debt you pay, Riley continued, and her voice was low and fierce and absolute. She is not a guilt you manage. If you come into her life, you come in fully, consistently, and permanently, not with money, with presence. If you cannot do that, if you miss one Saturday, cancel one promise, make her feel for one moment like she is optional, you lose the right to try again. Not because I am cruel, because she has spent 9 years without a father, and she has been magnificent. She does not need someone who is going to teach her that the people who are supposed to stay are the ones most likely to leave. Minjun did not look away. I understand, he said. I need you to mean that. I mean it. He came the following Saturday, 10 o'clock exactly. 2 hot chocolates, because Hannah had mentioned it once, and he had registered it with the same precision he applied to everything that mattered. A new chess set, because she had mentioned the old one had a missing knight, which she had described as a personal offense. Hannah opened the door before he knocked. She looked at the chess set, then at him. You remembered, she said. I remembered. She took the chess set without ceremony and turned back into the apartment, already moving toward the table where she had clearly prepared to play, pieces arranged, board centered, her chair already pulled out. You're white, she called from across the room. I always play black, non-negotiable. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Riley was visible at the end of the hallway, coffee cup in hand, watching. She did not smile. She did not signal anything that could be called encouragement or welcome or forgiveness. But she did not look away either. And she did not close the space between them, but she did not fill the doorway either. She left it open. He stepped inside. The door closed behind him, not with the finality of 9 years ago, not with the hollow sound of something being sealed. It closed the way doors close when someone has simply come in from the cold, and the warmth of the room has already begun to do what warmth does, quietly and without drama, to everything it surrounds. Hannah was already resetting a pawn she had placed incorrectly, correcting her own error before anyone pointed it out. You get 1 reckless move per game, she announced without looking up. I made that rule up. It means you can make 1 mistake and it doesn't count, but only 1. Minjun sat down across from her. That's generous, he said. Hannah looked up at him then, those eyes, his eyes, full of something ancient and unafraid. I know, she said simply. Don't waste it. And in the kitchen, Riley James set her coffee down on the counter, looked at the afternoon light coming through the window she had stood in front of on the first day she brought that apartment into her life, and allowed herself, not forgiveness, not yet, perhaps not for a long time, perhaps in pieces, perhaps never completely, but something that was the first breath after holding it for 9 years, something that was not for him, something that was entirely, completely, irrevocably hers. She exhaled. And from the living room, she heard her daughter laugh, sharp and bright and startled, the laugh of someone who did not expect to be surprised and was delighted to have been wrong, and then the low, careful, unfamiliar sound of a man learning, one Saturday at a time, what it means to stay. Riley did everything right. She worked double shifts. She studied through the night. She raised a daughter who was magnificent, without help, without apology, without ever lowering herself to beg someone to see what was always right in front of them. 9 years. She carried it for 9 years. And do you know what Riley never had time for during those 9 years? Herself. Not her skin. Not her glow. Not the ritual she deserved after every double shift, every night class. Every morning she smiled at her daughter like the world hadn't tried to break her in half. And maybe that sounds familiar to you. Because there is a woman watching this right now who has been doing exactly what Riley did. Carrying everything, rebuilding everything, holding everyone up, while quietly watching her skin change after 45 and telling herself it can wait. Dark spots that won't fade, a glow that used to be there and isn't anymore. Products that promise everything and understand nothing about what mature black skin actually needs. Here's what nobody tells you. It's not about finding the right moisturizer. It's about understanding the science of your skin. After 45, your melanin reacts differently to inflammation. Your collagen drops faster than any product label will admit. And the barrier that holds everything together, the one that makes skin look like glass, needs to be rebuilt from the inside out. Korean skincare figured this out decades ago. And someone finally wrote it down specifically for black women 45 and over. Riley exhaled at the end of her story. This is yours. Scan the QR code on your screen right now, or find the link in the description below. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been dismissed by someone who chose to believe a lie about you rather than trust what they knew was real, and had to rebuild your entire life in silence, with no one watching and no one apologizing? Have you ever carried something alone? A truth, a wound, a child, a future? Not because you had no choice, but because your dignity refused to let you beg someone to see what was always right in front of them? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, truth, and redemption, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.